Thank you all for coming and welcome to the Colorado Conference on Civic Discourse. And I'd like to begin by thanking El Pomar for partnering with us and letting us spend a couple of days in this beautiful place. In fact, when they finally agreed to let us use this venue, my anxiety about organizing the conference was put to rest because I was like, well, even if I totally blow this, no one's going to be too upset about spending a couple days here. So that was very helpful. Now, what I want to do here in my opening remarks is spend some time defining the terms of the conference title. Like, what are we doing here? What is Civic Discourse and why Civic Discourse? But before we do that, I think we should say a few things about the context in which it is taking place. What are the political conditions we find ourselves in both society in general, but also in higher education in particular, which is a particular focus of the conference. Now, I don't want to belabor the first issue, which is that of our current political climate, but there's no doubt that in the last decade or more, we have all witnessed and experienced the decline in civility and in our politics and in our public discourse. Political polarization, distrust in institutions, and an increased tendency to view the political other as not just wrong, but evil or bad or immoral, have all been on the rise. And the new administration in Washington is certainly putting more pressure on our institutions, employing a sort of move fast and break things disruptive approach to many of them. And this extends, of course, to higher education, where if you've been following the news, you've certainly seen aggressive attacks on the likes of Harvard, Columbia, and others. And I'm sure that in the course of our conversations over the next couple of days, this administration's actions will come up, as they very well should. But I also want us to point us back and make sure that we remember that the problems that this conference is aimed at addressing, such as censorship and incivility, the lack of viewpoint diversity in universities, these long predate the current administration. You could go back many decades to look at the beginnings of them. Many would probably point, though, to the early 2010s as the beginning of the period where these problems came to a head, resulting in a palpable chill on university campuses, where open inquiry and courageous truth-seeking and open debate were no longer the norm. Now, in addition to these problems, civic knowledge has been in precipitous decline, and this makes it much harder for us to combat some of these negative trends. And there are dozens, of surveys from all over the political spectrum that you can very easily pull up that will talk about this decline in civic knowledge. I would just like to share a couple data points just to set the stage from a survey done a year ago by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And among many findings, there's a few that I think stand out. First, more than 70% of Americans fail a basic civic literacy quiz on topics like the three branches of government, the number of Supreme Court justices, and other basic functions of our democracy. And this is actually sort of the test that an immigrant would be expected to take on their path to citizenship. Just half were able to correctly name the branch of government where bills become laws. And 1 in 3 did not know that there are 3 branches of government, right? So a full third of the country not aware that there are 3 branches of government, right? So as one of the survey's creators concluded after these findings came in, quote, "You can't fix what you don't understand." And so our universities, but also our education system in general, must address these issues. And there is disagreement over the origins and the development of these issues. But I don't think there's disagreement that they exist. There's widespread agreement that civil discourse, pluralism and viewpoint diversity, open inquiry, and the pursuit of truth have been lost or weakened, at least weakened in education, and replaced by echo chambers, self-censorship, and in many cases, ideological activism. How bad these problems are, how deeply ingrained they are in the educational system itself, who is to blame for them, I think are all matters that also admit of disagreement, right? People are going to have different stories in this room about how this came to be. But I think it's clear, evidenced simply by the fact that there are so many people in this room, that we all recognize and acknowledge that there are problems, right, and that these are serious issues. Problems that are dangerous enough to warrant some action in response. And of course, this conference is part of that response, as is a trend of various programs around the country aimed at restoring civil discourse and improving civics education within universities and beyond. So in the past 10 years, we have seen the growth of what actually Paul Carisse has called CTLs, or Civic Thought and Leadership Centers or Institutes, on university campuses, so within the university system. SCETL, or the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State, was founded in 2016, so about 10 years ago. And this has been followed by similar institutions at universities such as Texas, Austin, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Florida, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Ohio State, Utah Valley, and more. And these that are just mentioned have come with funding from state legislatures, right? There's been appropriations from state legislatures using public funding to set these things up. But other privately funded centers have preceded these more public efforts. In many ways, I think they kind of set the stage for some of these more public efforts. So the James Madison program at Princeton, or the Benson Center at our sister campus in CU Boulder. Notice I say sister campus, not big brother campus. The Benson Center at CU Boulder, and then the center I direct here at UCCS, and the center that organized this conference, the Center for the Study of Government and the Individual, from here on known as CSGI. So I'd like to take this opportunity to say a few words about CSGI. CSGI has been around for 25 years, founded in the year 2000. This is the same year as the James Madison program was founded at Princeton, putting UCCS in good company. And now I never miss an opportunity if I'm talking to a potential donor to remind them that it's UCCS and Princeton that are the co-equal partners in pioneering this movement. Now, I can usually get away with this false equivalency because Professor Robert George, the founder of the James Madison program, is not in the room. Today, that actually is not a winning strategy. But while certainly not equal in terms of impact, visibility, or we'll be honest, funding, James Madison and CSGI do share much in terms of mission. And it's a testament to the great leadership by some in this room, and a public-private partnership between UCCS and local partners that UCCS had a center like CSGI so early on. And CSGI works to educate and prepare UCCS students and the broader community for citizenship through 3 programs. I just want to tell you about these briefly. The first in the original program is called the Program on Preserving a Free and Prosperous Society. Here we focus on civil society, limited government, and the role of markets and commercial society in maintaining a free and prosperous society. The second is the program on the American Constitution, where we study the foundational principles, ideas, and texts of our American political system. We do all of these things through public lectures, through a student honors program, and other programming throughout the year. And then finally, our newly formed and third program, the program on civic discourse, which we've been doing programming on for over a year now, but this conference today officially launches this program on civic discourse, which means I can now return to what I promised to do, which is define our terms and start thinking about what is this conference all about and why civic discourse. Perhaps some of you thought when you saw the title, well, civic discourse is kind of a strange rendering, right? It's not what we necessarily expect to hear. We hear a lot about civil discourse and also about civics or civic education, but we don't necessarily put civic discourse together. But I do that very deliberately for a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, civic discourse, recognizes the importance of both civil discourse and civility and civic knowledge. And I think it's the right approach and the right rendering for a couple reasons. The first one is actually just marketing, and I'll explain that one. But the second one is because I really think they are inextricably tied. But the first one is a bit about marketing. When we first started thinking about this conference, the name that popped up was the Colorado Conference on Civic Discourse. And I just very quickly looked at myself and was like, there's no way you're going to say that for 2 years, right? I also don't think that Don Draper would approve, right? It's not a punchy title. So Colorado Conference on Civic Discourse is a little punchier. But there's also something I noticed just talking with folks about these sorts of themes is when you bring up civil discourse, folks have a very immediate response. And it's a good response, but it's a very immediate response. They go, yes, you're absolutely right. We need to be nicer to each other. We need to listen better. Now, there's a ton to that, right? That's a major part of the issue, but it's not the whole story. So I think when you just say civil discourse, it immediately goes to one way of thinking. Civic discourse adds this civics component, and I'm going to try to explain why I think that's important. So that, again, brings us to that second reason, which is that civil discourse and civic knowledge are inextricably tied together. They aim towards the same goal, a deliberative, self-governing republic. They are necessary for genuine citizenship. Both of them together are necessary for genuine citizenship and for a political body to exist of citizens that can actually work towards this goal. But also, they just complement each other in very specific ways. I'd like to give an example of the rights in the First Amendment to maybe try to put some meat on the bones of this idea. I think we need to understand the logic of the First Amendment. Now, the various rights that are protected by the First Amendment aren't just sort of random. There's a logic or a process that underlays them. So here's a way to think about it. If you disagree with a law, or you want the government to change something or to do something, the first thing you're going to do is actually think about it, freedom of thought. We'll start with that one. But then the first thing you're going to do is you're going to start to formulate that and try to persuade others of this. So you're going to use your freedom of speech. Once you've done that, you're going to realize, I need to broadcast this to as many people as possible. So what are you going to do? You're going to try to get a hold of the press, right? You're going to try to use the press. You've got freedom of the press. Once you've done that, you're going to be a little further along in the process, and you're going to realize you need to invite others to discuss options and discuss details. You're going to do that through assembly. So you have the freedom to assemble, the freedom of assembly. And then finally, once you've done all that work, you're going to approach government and ask it to address your concerns, whatever they are. In other words, you have the right to petition the government. So you can see there's a logic to this process. You have freedom of speech, then you go to the press, freedom of assembly, and then finally to petitioning the government. And this is civil government. It is democratic, it is deliberative, and it is legitimated by the consent of citizens after rational, informed discussions. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know that this process is aspirational. Definitely can't take it for granted or assume it. And I think it's fair to say it's not even probable. Rather, it is a self-governing ideal. It needs to be worked for, and it can very easily be undermined by tribalism, by mob rule, or anything that places emotional intensity over reason, debate, and deliberation, right? It can very easily just become, how do we change things? Well, who can yell the loudest? So this process within the First Amendment has to be learned and practiced. And this is something that the founders understood very well. In their debates about government provision of education, of public education, one of the primary reasons was preparing the public for genuine citizenship. True citizenship is something that is learned, and it must be renewed with every generation, right? There's a process of continual renewal. I don't think that many people would argue that in our current climate, emotional intensity and tribalism seem to have the upper hand. Like, we're in need of that renewal today. So what we need to learn to be citizens are the basics of civic knowledge and the practice of civil discourse. Let me just say a very few words about those. Civic education gives us the knowledge necessary to understand how our political system works, both our rights, but also the procedures of government. In other words, to kind of twist that conclusion from the survey about the civics decline, if we understand it, we can begin to fix it, right? But we have to understand our rights and how government works. And I think we can think of civil discourse as the practice we need to do this work. Civil discourse is not merely about being nicer to each other, though again, that is a big thing, right? We should do that. but also about engaging in reasoned debate. More importantly, it is about how to disagree without immediately ceasing debate or leaving the conversation altogether. And we should always remind ourselves that we never think about civility when we agree with something, with someone. It just doesn't even come up. It is only in the face of disagreement that we need to think about what it requires. So civil discourse is about practicing deliberative virtues, recognizing that self-government requires difficult conversations and continuous debates about a shared political future. It is only through civil discourse that we can genuinely exercise our First Amendment rights as well. So again, that's why civic discourse, I think, goes together. Now, academic freedom is another focus of this conference, and we should also note that the Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized that academic freedom is a special concern under the First Amendment. There's been several cases that have affirmed this. It is seen as an extension of the broader constitutional rights to freedom of thought, analysis, and debate within the context of higher education. In the same way that we see the need for civil discourse when we encounter political disagreements, we see the need for academic freedom when there is scholarly disagreement. And I think what we need to recognize is that the university is not doing its job if only some viewpoints or approaches are deemed appropriate, or if some just dominate to the point where others don't get a say. The university needs to be a place of competing viewpoints, courageous truth-seeking, and a place where difficult and uncomfortable questions can be investigated. Overall, I think that university faculty and staff and leaders should be modeling the deliberative virtues for students as well, which I think in some way means that we should be disagreeing more often and out in the open as well. It should probably be more contentious than it is, but we should do that out in the open. And I would argue too that the university is a special place for this. Like, the university is the appropriate place to learn the deliberative virtues, and not just because it's got a special claim to knowledge or intelligence, but rather because in the university the stakes of disagreement are relatively low. Right? So in all cases, disagreement can be uncomfortable, but there's certain consequences that go along with it. But disagreement in the university, there's actually low stakes. Students, for example, will never lose their job for exploring an alternative viewpoint. In the classroom, that's not happening. They're not going to become estranged from their family by voicing strong opinions. Well, actually, I think I'm confusing myself here. You want to do it in the classroom so you don't become estranged, right, from your family by voicing a strong opinion. Like, the classroom is the safe laboratory to do this in. So the university should be the place where students learn the deliberative virtues, where civil discourse and civic education are instilled in our future citizens and, of course, our future leaders. So in conclusion, all of these things, free speech, self-government, academic freedom, deliberative virtues, I think we can include all of these in the concept of civic discourse. When I say civic discourse, that's what I mean. All of these things come together. But so finally, I would like to say something about the last word in the title, Colorado, right? Colorado, the state of Colorado. And I may come off as a bit of a hypocrite here, because while I'm talking about reasoned debate and back and forth, this might sound just like a one-way emotional rant. But after the payoff of 2 years of organizing this is 25 glorious minutes where I just get to say whatever I want to a captive audience. So Colorado is my home state, and it's changed incessantly since I was a child, for both good and bad. It's a state of transplants, right? Many people come from elsewhere. And the result of this, it seems to me, is that it doesn't really have a strong or settled culture, and that cultural norms tend to be weak. Now, I mean this in a relative sense. Other places that I've lived, Chicago, Atlanta, Texas, they have stronger cultural norms. They seem to guide people's behavior. Even if you came from somewhere else, they kind of guide your behavior a little more than they do here in Colorado. And I think this is true of the Rocky Mountain West in general, which I'll mention later. But I'm wondering if this weaker this weaker set of cultural norms is also a little bit bad, but a little bit good as well, which I'll try to come back to. But there's no doubt that Colorado does have its problems. Colorado mountain towns, which I know we have a few people here represented from some mountain towns here, which to outsiders seem like a slice of paradise, and they are in many ways, are in reality sites of widespread depression and even high suicide rates for many of the people who live there. Our cities, Denver, Colorado Springs in particular, also certainly have their problems: rising crime, rising income inequality, homelessness. So we can see all of this just walking around. Now, I'm not trying to muddy the waters here and suggest that that's what we're here doing, is solving all of these problems together, right? Because I know there's many, many causes to all of this. But what I do just want to suggest is that our civic culture has declined, certainly since I've lived here. I've experienced it in my lifetime. And I think simply we're not nearly as friendly as we used to be. Part of this is just getting larger. But I think it's just getting more people and growing into bigger cities. But I think it's more than that. And I'd like to share a personal anecdote that may or may not help us think about this. You can disregard this if you want. It's just been something I've been thinking about, so I thought I'd share it. So I have exercised on the trails literally just right outside this window, right up this canyon right here, for pretty much my whole life. Since I was 12, 13 years old, for the past 30 years, I've mountain biked mostly, but also hiked up in these trails. And it's changed a lot. The sort of trail etiquette has changed a lot. People are not as friendly on the trails as they used to be. My wife, Bethany, who's here today, can tell you how often I complain about bad interactions on the trail. But you shouldn't listen to her, because she'll also tell you that I'm too old to be out mountain biking. So, but in any case, this is a problem, right? It is a problem, but it's also a fixable problem. I'd like to say something I think is kind of an interesting little nugget. There was something called the Cowboy Code before law, political institutions, judicial institutions came to the West. So when it was still the Wild West, there was something called the Cowboy Code, right? It's kind of, for those political philosophers out there, something like natural law for the American West. And among other things, the Cowboy Code stipulated two things. If you're passing somebody on the trail, on the road, you acknowledge them. You make eye contact, tip of the hat, you say howdy, right? That was step one. The second thing it stipulated, step two, is you don't look back at them after you pass them, right? Right, in a big way, this is about sort of threat detection and signaling you're not a threat. But it's also about civility. It's also about cooperation and interaction. And if we're honest, even in a very civilized society like today, there's an aspect of threat involved in like civil discourse, and being civil to people is about saying I'm not a threat, I'm a potential collaborator, a potential partner. But this Cowboy Code, I think, was very much in place when I was younger, spending time on these trails. But it weakened over time, and then during COVID, it nearly died, right? You could be the only person on a trail with one other person, and it would walk right by. It's a terrible experience. It really is a bad experience, okay? But things have changed in the last couple of years. I've actually talked about this with some folks on the trail. There's more friendliness. People are making a deliberate effort. We've actually talked about making a deliberate effort. And it's shifting. And what that tells us is that the cultural norm that was weakening and then died during COVID is actually a pretty weak norm. It's a weak norm, and it responds well to a deliberate intervention to improve it. And I'm wondering if the sort of more unsettled, weaker nature of Colorado culture, or culture in the Rocky Mountain West, isn't also an opportunity. It should, in theory at least, respond better to our deliberate interventions, right? Reforming our institutions, implementing better practices, may have a better chance of resulting in real societal change here than in some other places that do have a more settled culture. And I extend that to the Rocky Mountain West because I know we have a lot of friends here from Wyoming, from Utah, Arizona, and other places. I have a sister who lives in Salt Lake City. It's very fair to say that Utah is still settling, right? We're still settling Utah. The place is booming and going crazy. And that's true, of course, to some degree in Colorado and the other Rocky Mountain states. And perhaps that leaves us, with an opportunity that what we are able to do in meetings like this, through efforts like this, and through efforts I know many people in this room are in organizations doing things like this, have a real chance of making a difference, right? A real chance of making a difference. I mean, even if that's not true, I certainly think we should think that way, right? Okay. So that is it for talking about what this conference is all about. And thank you for joining us in Colorado for this conference. For many people from around the country, from the coasts, that we don't see here in Colorado often, it's very, very nice to welcome and have you here. Now, before I introduce our keynote speakers, I would like to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors. So FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, has been a support from the start. They will also, yes. And they will also be helping us with some programming this afternoon. There'll be a couple different FIRE programs for folks. And we also have Greg Lukianoff, the president of FIRE, with us today, who will be one of the panelists. Also, the Benson Center at CU Boulder, been a great sponsor, and CSGI and the Benson Center have been doing more together in the last year or so, and we hope to continue that. We have neighbors from Utah. Oh, yep. Also, we have our neighbors from Utah Valley University here today and its Center for Constitutional Studies, who we've also worked with in the past and look forward to doing more things with in the future. Rocky Mountain PBS has been a big help, particularly in the marketing aspect of this, getting the word out, getting people excited about it. And they also have a program called Above the Noise, which is very similar in theme to what we're talking about at this conference. And you'll hear a little bit about that as well this afternoon. So Rocky Mountain PBS, thank you. And then finally, the Woodford Foundation. And Joe and Steve Woodford are here today. They might not even have wanted me to say that. They don't love to be gushed over. But I will just say that, the Woodford Foundation has been with CSGI since 2000. They were the public-private partnership. It would not exist without them. They're just a consistent support, and they've also agreed to give extra support for this conference. So for the Woodford Foundation. And then I would just like to thank a few individuals. First would be Chancellor Jennifer Sobonet, who I'm not sure. Good morning, boss. And Jennifer supported this from the beginning. I think I can be a little bit hazy, but I think she's been here about a year and a half. And from the first time we met about a year and a half ago, she's like, yes, let's do it. I'm all behind it. And she's been a huge support. And then also other folks from UCCS and Development Office, I'd like to acknowledge Martin Wood, Melinda Hageman, Martha Johnson, Seth Porter, and Jen Furta. And then most importantly for me, certainly, but I think for all of us, I would like to thank Zach Kroger. He's in the back here. So it's bad of me, but I can't even remember Zach's official title. I just know him as the guy that makes things at CSGI run. And he came into this late. He's only been with us for like 6 months. But it's because we lost our person who was in his position before, and it immediately got better. With someone coming in later, but he immediately made it better, made it easier for me. It's not a stretch to say that if it wasn't for him, I might not be here. I'd be sort of crouched in a dark corner, having nightmares about conference emails. But he really stepped up and made this thing happen. So thank you, Zach. All right, so I'm going to invite actually before I do that, I'm going to introduce our keynote speakers. I do want to go over some housekeeping items just so we're all on the same page. Bathrooms, there is a pretty white building right out there, a square white building where the bathrooms are. So you can go right out that walkway and take a left to get to the bathrooms. Number 2, because I've been asked this before, you can see our screen here, CSGI.co. That is not a typo. That's not a typo. A lot of people put it in CSGI.com because they assume they must have forgot the M. It is not. So just want everyone to know that CSGI.co is the proper web address. Another thing, we have a book table and a materials table towards the back. And some authors that are some with us today and some others that couldn't quite make it were generous enough to give us some books to give away. We have a very limited amount, and we're going to keep kind of replenishing it, but I'd ask you to probably only take one and only take it if you're really going to read it. But do take them. Do take them. But we have a very limited amount, and there's other, of course, more like pamphlets or smaller brochures. Please take a look at those at your leisure over the course of the 2 days. Finally, I did want to mention one thing about what's happening after this. We're going to have the keynote event here, just a few minutes, and then we will have a split lunch where the main body of people will hang out in here for one of the FIRE presentations, Foundational for Individual Rights and Expression, and another student breakout session. This is for any undergraduate, graduate, PhD, master's, doesn't matter. Anyone who's a student, and I'm maybe going beyond what I should say here, but maybe if you want to go and you're not a student, you could do it, but I could get in trouble for that. There'll be a breakout session as well after lunch, but you'll be having lunch in this room. There will also be a VIP lunch for some of you that I've contacted, and you'll want to find me, and we'll go over to that after the keynote. Okay. Well, enough of that and enough having to listen to me. I would love to introduce our keynote speakers who I'm very honored to be able to introduce them. And one thing I'll say about Professor Robbie George and Professor Cornel West is that if I was actually to read their full bio, right, like all their accomplishments, we would completely throw the schedule of the conference off. So they were nice enough to give me a truncated bio, and I will give that in just 1 second. But I'd like to share an anecdote which I think says a little bit about how their peers view them. So when I first made the list of speakers for this conference, I knew it was going to be a bit of a hard sell. I made the list. I knew these were highly sought-after speakers. Pretty much all of our panelists are, and I thought it's going to be kind of hard to get them there. And I had some initial conversations with folks. Hey, we've got this Colorado conference on civic discourse in June in Colorado. The response would be something like, yeah, well, that does sound really interesting. Maybe, I don't know, it's a long way out. We'll see, Then I'd say, well, we're trying to get Robbie George and Cornel West as speakers. And they say, well, that's interesting, maybe I'd like to hear about that. Then when I was able to actually get Professor George and Professor West contracted, my tactics completely changed. And the phone call was quite different. It was much more like, hi there, Robbie George and Cornel West will be speaking in Colorado at a conference in June. Would you like to be a part of it? Great, thank you, I've got you down. But it got very, very easy. It made my life a lot easier, but it also, I think, shows how other people, other professors and other people in the business view these two speakers that we're very lucky to have today. So now I would like to invite those speakers to make their way to the stage. And I do know that I believe Zach will give you your microphone so that you can have that ready. I'm going to start by saying a few things about Professor George. Robert P. George is McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. He has served as chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics. He has also been the U.S. member of UNESCO's World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology. He was a judicial fellow at the U.S. Supreme Court, where he received the Justice Tom C. Clark Award. He attended Swarthmore and holds the degrees of JD and MTS from Harvard University and multiple degrees from Oxford University. He's a recipient of the U.S. Presidential Citizens Medal and Princeton University's Presidential Award for Distinguished Teaching. Cornel West. Dr. Cornel West, affectionately known to many as Brother West, and he actually called me Brother Steve today, which is pretty cool, is the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Chair at Union Theological Seminary. Dr. West teaches on the works of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as well as courses in the philosophy of religion, African American critical thought, and a wide range of subjects, including, but by no means limited to, the classics, philosophy, politics, cultural theory, literature, and music. He has a passion to communicate to a vast variety of publics in order to keep alive the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., a legacy of telling the truth and bearing witness to love and justice. Dr. West is the former professor of the practice of public philosophy at Harvard University and professor emeritus at Princeton University. Cornel West graduated magna cum laude from Harvard in 3 years and obtained his MA and PhD in philosophy at Princeton. He has written 20 books and edited 13. He is best known for his classics, Race Matters and Democracy Matters, and for his memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. His most recent book, Black Prophetic Fire, offers an unflinching look at 19th and 20th century African American leaders and their visionary legacies. The title of their talk today is Common Ground, a Civil Conversation. So please join me in welcoming Professors West and Professor George.
Well, thank you, everyone, and of course, special thanks to Steve and to Zach. It's a real honor. I know I speak for Cornell and myself in saying what a great honor it is to be participating in this program. It's wonderful to have our fearless leader, Chancellor Jennifer, here. Thanks for being here. I also want to say on a personal note how great it is to be with so many wonderful leaders of the movement for civil discourse and for civic education. The great Greg Lukianoff, the great Nadine Strawson, the great Jonathan Zimmerman, leaders of civic institutes, Paul Carice, Josh Dunn. I know Michael Polyakov is coming. Shiloh Brooks from my program at Princeton, the Madison program, will be here. You've really pulled together the A-team, Steve, and I congratulate you for that. Also, congratulations on the 25th anniversary of the CSGI, the fraternal twin of the James Madison program at Princeton. We're the, I guess, older siblings of all these programs and institutes that have sprung up over the years. Now, many of these programs and institutes, I'm thinking, Paul, of Arizona State, of course, University of Texas, University of Florida, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, are multiple times larger than the CSGI and the Madison program. But it's like, being a little brother who makes it to 5'9", and then, the next guy is 6'2", and the next guy is 6'5". But we hope you're still looking up to us. I know I speak for CSGI as well as for the Madison program in that respect. And what a joy it is to be with my beloved friend and brother, Cornel West. We have now been, it's our 20th anniversary, Brother Cornel. We have now been teaching together, lecturing together, arguing with each other, speaking together, praying together, singing together for 20 years. And it has been one of the greatest blessings in my life, and certainly the greatest blessing of my academic life. I've learned so much from this brother. Even when he's wrong, he teaches me so much. And he has modeled exactly what we are trying to promote in our institutes and centers for civil discourse and for civic education. And what am I talking about here? I'm talking about the spirit of truth-seeking. That's what Brother Cornel models. That's what I'm looking to him for inspiration for. It's what we all look to him for inspiration for. Modeling that spirit of truth-seeking. And if you're a truth seeker, you're going to be a person who's determined to get at the truth. You're going to believe there is a truth and that it's worth pursuing. But at the same time, if you're a truth seeker, and Cornel models this so well, you're also going to be aware that you will never know the truth fully, that you will never know the truth perfectly, that we are frail, fallen, fallible human beings. We're going to get some things wrong, and that means that we're going to need certain virtues if we are to be determined truth seekers. One of those virtues is intellectual humility. All of us would check the right box on the form if it said, "Are you infallible, yes or no?" We know which box to check, right? But it's one thing to notionally understand our fallibility. It's another thing altogether to existentially understand our fallibility, knowing that we could be wrong, and not only about the small, minor, trivial, superficial things in life, but even about the big, profound, important issues, the issues of meaning and value, the issues of human nature, the human good, human dignity, human rights, human destiny. It's on those big issues that we tend to construct our identities. All of us, our identities are partially constructed around our beliefs. And that makes it hard for us existentially and not merely notionally. Just an aspect of the human condition in all places, at all times, makes it hard for us to really get hold of the idea that we could be wrong about the things that most matter to us, our deepest, most cherished beliefs, our identity-forming beliefs, our beliefs on the big issues. To actually be open in that way takes the cultivation, lifelong cultivation. You can always lose it. You always have to deepen it, of intellectual humility. And it requires that thing that Greg and Nadine have spoken up so powerfully for, and that is the condition, the circumstance of free speech in the broader society, and most especially in the academic world. Why is that? It's because we all know that we're wrong about some things. I mean, I think I can speak for everybody. Is there anybody here who has only true beliefs in your head, no false beliefs? No, all of us know right now, and we share this with every other person on the planet, we hold some beliefs in our head that are false. And those may include beliefs about those important things, not just the trivial things. Now, obviously we don't want to hold false beliefs in our head, do we? We'd like to be able to swap them out for true beliefs. If we're truth seekers, we're not so in love with our opinions that we'd prefer to hold them even if they're false rather than have true opinions. If we're serious truth seekers, we want to swap out as many of those false beliefs as we can and replace them with true beliefs. But nobody's going to ever be able to do that if you do not allow yourself to be challenged by somebody who questions those beliefs. If you shut that person down, if you take away that person's freedom of speech. We need freedom of speech as a condition for truth-seeking. Anybody's got to be able to challenge any belief that we hold. None of us should want any of our beliefs, not a single one, no matter how deeply we hold them, no matter how central they are to our identities and our lifestyles and who we think we are. None of us should want any of those beliefs immunized against challenge and critique, because the challenge is our only hope of making progress, swapping out some of those false beliefs. We'll never get them all out. Some of those false beliefs and replacing them with true beliefs. And here it's important to learn a lesson from the great 19th century liberal philosopher John Stuart Mill, the great British thinker. Mill noted the importance of legal protections, rules protecting free speech. He noticed that. He knew they were important, and they are important. They're essential. Our universities need free speech principles. Our society needs a First Amendment. I wish some European societies would learn the lesson from us and adopt First Amendment principles, not just European societies. More societies across the entire world would adopt free speech principles like our First Amendment. They're very, very important, but they're not enough. If you look at Mill's great teaching in Chapter 2 of On Liberty, the chapter on freedom of thought and discussion, you'll see him make the powerful, compelling point that beyond the rules, as essential as they are, the formal protections of free speech, you need a culture of free speech. You need a climate in which people are free and feel free to speak their minds, to question the dominant opinions, whether the dominant opinions in the society or the dominant opinions in the university or dominant opinions in any subgroup, precisely so that we don't fall into the truth-killing phenomenon of tribalism. Now, just one more word on that before I turn the microphone over to Cornell. It's not bad that we human beings, it's another feature of human nature, and it's not a bad one. It's not bad that we human beings desire acceptance from other people. We are individuals, yes, CSGI, individual. But we are also made for relationships with others, friendship, community. So we naturally long for acceptance in communities, in groups, you might say in tribes. And often, communities are integrated around a sharing of belief. Churches are a very good example. Religious organizations, a very good example of that. Political parties, another good example of that. Even universities, in some ways, are like that. The best universities will have some shared beliefs, even though there should be lots of viewpoint diversity. That's really critical. Steve was right about that. But we need a belief in truth-seeking. Otherwise, what are we doing? We need a belief in intellectual honesty. We need a belief in intellectual integrity. If we don't share those beliefs around which we integrate ourselves as a community, this community will fall apart. So it's natural for human beings to form communities. It's natural to want to be accepted in your communities, and in many cases, those communities are integrated around shared beliefs. But you know what that means? That means that there are some beliefs, the questioning of which puts your good standing and membership in that community where you may have valued your membership at risk. This is what's hard in the truth-seeking business. Communities, generally speaking, don't like heretics. They don't celebrate dissenters. We're pushing in the same direction. We've got a cause. It may be religious, it may be political, it may be cultural, it may be artistic, it may be literate. We've got a cause. And being part of this community means sharing in the convictions of the community. But if we're willing to question everything, should be, then we might find ourselves disagreeing with core beliefs of the community. And now we're in a quandary. Do I express my dissent at the cost of alienating myself from a community membership in which I deeply value? It's critical to my own identity, thinking of myself as Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, libertarian, socialist. Do I risk it? And this is why a second virtue, Cornell has also modeled this one, is so important. In addition to intellectual humility, courage. Courage. Cornell calls it the enabling virtue. He echoes the Greeks on that. It's courage, and courage alone, that will enable us to be faithful truth seekers and truth speakers. When speaking what we believe to be the truth or questioning dogmas we believe we have reason to doubt places our acceptance, our membership, our good standing in communities we value at risk. Cornell?
Yes, indeed. I could listen to my brother all day. All day, indeed. And it has been 20 magnificent years, though, brother. I'm telling you. No, this brother, he's been a joy in my life. He really has. I have a deep love for him. It's no way reducible to politics. I have a deep brotherhood, deeper than a friendship. It's no way reducible to agreement on social analysis or on policy. He gives me the loving right to be wrong. I give him the loving right to be wrong. But we have so much in common in terms of first acknowledging that we are really just cracked vessels trying to love our crooked neighbor with our crooked hearts, to invoke the great W.H. Auden, which is to say we begin with the Socratic legacy of Athens, acknowledging that intellectual integrity, conscious self-examination and self-interrogation is part and parcel of what it means to be human. But we know Socrates never cries, he never sheds a tear, which means he never loved anybody. He loved wisdom, but he never loved anybody. Because anybody who's loved anybody has shed tears. like Jeremiah, like Esther, like Jesus, like Aretha Franklin and Carole King. Tears, weeping, and that has to do with shattering numbness, shattering indifference. And the great Rabbi Heschel used to say, indifference to evil's more insidious than evil itself. That's part of the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem. So anytime I get a chance to just spend time with my brother, I know we're going to have a good time. Now, usually we have our families together. His blessed Cindy and Nahid, my wife, and my daughter, who was very much his niece, and he's an uncle. She's there at Princeton, graduated, summa cum laude a couple of years ago. She's third-year graduate student in German, and our beloved Zaytun. But I do want to salute Brother Stephen. I get a chance to read some of his powerful stuff on the American challenge to Nietzsche. I appreciate it, brother. You're not just an administrator, you're a scholar. Very important. Give it up for our brother. Give it up for our brother. Free spirits or free riders. That's the name of one of his wonderful essays. And then Brother Zach, good God, we met him in the hotel, and what a loving spirit he is. Good God Almighty. I know we've already given him an applause, but we can give him another one too. Absolutely. I met my dear sister Jennifer, the visionary leader, and I met Brother Roger, and then I met so many others, and I said, this Colorado. Not just a state, but the city is a special state. And let me tell you, one of the reasons why Colorado Springs is so very, very special for me, and it has everything to do with our subject matter. The greatest American sociological theorist was born in Colorado Springs. And his name was Talcott Parsons. And his father was the dean of the faculty at Colorado College. He was the vice president at Colorado College. He was part of the Slocum scandal that we won't get into. He was pushed out, and he went to Marietta College. But Talcott Parsons, who was my teacher, I took his last course in 1973. PhD from University of Heidelberg with Alfred Weber, the brother of Max Weber. Talcott Parsons was the major translator of Max Weber to the English-speaking world. And Max Weber, of course, is the towering figure in historical sociology of the modern world. Why do I go on and on? Because that same Talcott Parsons came from this town. And so you can see the rich dialectic between provincialism and internationalism, and never confuse provincialism with parochialism. Talcott was not parochial, but like all of us, he had his own roots, R-O-O-T-S. But he understood his relation to his R-O-O-T-S allowed him a R-O-U-T-E-S. The routes, so every corner of the globe, Talcott Parsons. Who was his major student? Robert Bella. You all remember Robert Bella, who wrote the classic Broken Covenant in 1975, responding to the 200th anniversary of America, and then went on to write Habits of the Heart, and we can go on and on and on. Yes, that's got a whole lot to do with not just civic knowledge, my dear Stephen, but civic virtue. Not just civic virtue, civic wisdom. We don't want to fetishize knowledge or idolize smartness. We're talking about wisdom at its deepest level. That's Socratic. Knowledge, crucial, better than ignorance. And ignorance better than stupidity. And never confuse stupidity and ignorance. All of us have our ignorance, as Brother Robbie pointed out so well. Even the highly learned have their learned ignorance. But stupidity is something else. Stupidity is when you give up the will of even being interested in the quest for truth. That's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer reflects upon this in his prison letters. In every society struggles against forms of stupidity and ignorance. just like every society has to come to terms with organized greed and weaponized hatred and institutionalized indifference to the weak and the vulnerable. And the history of the species is very much the history of the relative triumph of greed and hatred and envy and resentment. And it's just those moments of interruption. That's why Socrates, that's why Jesus, that's why Esther, that's why Amos, that's why Martin King, that's why Rabbi Heschel, that's why Edward Said and others are so important, to get us to see something deeper and act more courageously against the greed and the hatred and the indifference that shot through each and every one of our souls. The greatest short story ever written in the history of the American Empire was written by a brother named Herman Melville called Billy Budd. I could shift into my teacher's role and say, it would be nice to read it tonight. But I say, no, just read it before you die, or reread it before you die. Billy Budd, and there's a line in there where he says, truth uncompromisingly told will always have its jagged edges, which means when you talk about quest for truth, you're not talking about looking for the truth to criticize others initially. Truth to power, yes, very important. Truth to the relatively powerless, very important. But the most important is to tell the truth about yourself. How strong is the truth in your will to truth about yourself? Why? Because what we're wrestling with, not just now, I mean, people get all excited and so forth because it looks like the empire is decaying, looks like polarization setting in, looks like authoritarian populism, atavism, xenophobia. And I say to myself, that sounds like the human story. Herodotus, what do you have to say? Thucydides, what do you have to say? Isn't that the case every moment in the history of the species? The question is, who's going to be part of a cloud of witnesses to create moments of interruption, to break the hatred, to break the greed, to break the indifference, to break the envy, to break the resentment? And it begins at the personal level. Character is destiny, says Herodotus and Ralph Waldo Emerson. I know I've got my dear sister Reverend McKay here, my sister in the Unitarian sister. Just wave, just wave. I've told her she's like the Quakers. Oh, these Unitarian and Quakers, they might not always be right, but it's good to have them around because they're 11 in a loaf. 11 in a loaf. For what? Truth about oneself, truth about society, and truth about the world, and never ever to be surprised by evil or paralyzed by despair. Because evil triumphant is always, in the end, going to be weaker than right and good and truth and goodness. And somebody like myself as a Christian, the holy, at the moment defeated. That's what the cross is about. At the moment, defeated. That's what social movements crushed are about. At the moment, defeated. Now, you said Sister Nadine is here somewhere, huh? Yes, indeed. I didn't get a chance to see her. My wife was singing your praises for the last week or so. They've been in a wonderful dialogue. Because she's a, give it up for our dear Sister Nadine. I tell you, she's been a towering figure. To be a consistent person on rights and liberties. That's a very difficult thing. It's not just a question of being a libertarian or a liberal. Push the labels away. We're talking about character, integrity, honesty, decency, what Jane Austen would call constancy and consistency, and yet still a cracked vessel just like Robbie and I.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
No, you didn't know about it. No, every human being, as Samuel Beckett says, try again, fail better. That's the story of our lives. Try again, fail better. That's what it is to be human in the in, and we just want to be honest and candid about it. And so when Robbie and I get a chance to travel to these places, we go to chocolate cities in Dallas, we go to Vanilla, we go to indigenous peoples, we go to all different kind of folk. We always begin with the question, what kind of human being are you going to choose to be from your mama's womb to tomb? What does it mean to be a featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces, who one day will be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms? Now, I learned that in Shiloh Baptist Church. Wrestling with what it means to be human, so much deeper than skin color, so much deeper than gender, sexual orientation, national identity. We all have our provincial connections. But that choice of what kind of human being we're going to be, that's the crucial one. And that's very much, I think, what we're talking about. How do we generate forms of spiritual and moral breakthrough, awakening, reflection, witness without self-righteousness? That's what Brother Robbie and I have been talking about for 20 years or so together. We've been talking about it much longer in terms of our own individual projects. And it's there, I think, that kind of common ground is so crucial.
We pause for a commercial advertisement from our sponsors. Brother West and I have a new book out, Truth Matters, Fruitful Dialogue in an Age of Division. It's out in paperback and hardcover, and I think it's June 8th. It will be available on audio, and Nadine has ordered the first copy of the Audible book. Is it called Audible or Audio? Audible book. June 25th, is it? Okay, thank you for the correction. Very good. So I want to just add now a few words on three related topics. First, civility. Second, education. Third, the new Civic Center, this broad project for the renewal of civic education. So first on civility. Too often we have fallen into the understandable trap of equating civility with politesse, with politeness. Steve mentioned it. Now, politesse is important. Being polite is important. At least that's what my mother taught me, and I know that Irene West taught you. Being polite is important. It's not what civility is. What's the difference? I could be polite if Cornell and I are having one of our arguments about a substantive political issue or moral question or whatever. I could be polite in the sense that I could sit here quietly and listen to him preach his line on the thing, not interrupt him, smile, not actually listen to a word he says, wait till he's finished, and then I begin my rant, and he sits politely, smiles, doesn't listen to a word I'm saying because he's locked into his view just as I'm locked into my view. That's politeness. That is not civility. It's not civil discourse. What is civil discourse? That means not just hearing, but listening. That means listening in a truth-seeking spirit. What is that? That's a spirit of awareness that I may have something to learn from my interlocutor. Indeed, that he might be right and I might be wrong. How many of you are familiar with, I'm going to go back to John Stuart Mill. I do it all the time. I've noticed, I can say this as a conservative, Nadine, the older I get, the smarter John Stuart Mill gets. You know? How many of you are familiar with John Stuart Mill's trident? Does anybody know what I'm talking about if I talk about Mill's trident? Okay, let me explain it to everybody then. All right, Cornell and I, or any two people, having a disagreement about a subject. Now, a limited range of possibilities. He could be wrong, and I could be right. That is, he could be 100% wrong, I could be 100% right. He could be partially wrong, but partially right. And I could be partially wrong, but partially right. I could be 100% wrong, and he could be 100% right. Well, let's work with those three possibilities. Now, should I listen, genuinely listen, not just politely wait my turn to my interlocutor? And certainly, should I oppose efforts by other people to shut his speech down, whether it's in the university or whether it's in the broader society? Well, here's how Mill invites us to think about that. He says, look, if the reality is that I'm 100% wrong and Cornell's 100% right, then my goodness, nobody in the universe has a greater interest than me in making sure that I listen to him and that nobody shuts down his speech, because he's giving me the shot at actually correcting my errors, moving me from error to truth. That's a no-brainer. Now, what if he's partially wrong, but partially right? Well, here again, I, not him, I have a profound interest in listening to him in a truth-seeking spirit and making sure nobody violates his right to free speech, because this gives me the shot at correcting those parts of the matter, those parts of the question, those aspects or dimensions that I'm wrong about. So, knockdown argument in both those cases for truth-seeking listening and respecting free speech. But here's the third tine of the trident. Here's the one that I think people stumble about. What if the reality is that I'm 100% right and he's 100% wrong? Why on earth, what interest would I have in listening to him in a truth-seeking spirit and not allowing other people to shut down his free speech? Now we're getting into deep waters here. Mill makes the point, and I'm certainly persuaded, you decide for yourselves, I'm certainly persuaded that even if I'm 100% right, if I listen to the reasons and the arguments given by an intelligent, well-informed critic who's reached a different view, even if the view he's reached is incorrect, if I listen in a truth-seeking spirit, allow him to make his case, I will deepen my understanding of the truth. Even though it won't change my mind, I will deepen my understanding. And haven't we all had that experience where a conversation hasn't changed our mind, but it sure deepened our understanding? I've had that time and time again, and not only with Cornell, but with many other people. I have some famous disagreements on bioethics issues with my Princeton colleague, Peter Singer. We couldn't be further apart. And on a question like whether infanticide is morally acceptable, I'm pretty well convinced that Professor Singer is 100% wrong, and I'm 100% right. And yet, in our discussions, both in person and in print, having to defend my views against the criticisms of a powerful and intelligent, though wrong, critic, I have, no doubt about it, deepened my understanding. Now, I'll give you another example. Cornell, you'll be familiar with this one. I'm not a Marxist. Cornell's not a Marxist. I happen to think Marxism is responsible for some of the greatest evils in the history of the world. All right? That's a view. You don't have to share it. It's my view. All right? And yet, if you ask me, from what author and in what book have you learned the most? What has deepened your understanding the most about the history of American slavery? Very, very important topic for all Americans. I would have to say, you might agree, I would have to say Eugene Genovese's book, Roll, Jordan, Roll, written in his high Marxist stage. So you'd be 100% wrong, in my opinion, about Marxism, and yet using Marxian analytical tools, he sheds enormous light, more than any scholar I know, on this extraordinarily important for us Americans historical subject, right? So we have something to learn from people, even people we are dead certain are absolutely wrong. Civility means listening in a truth-seeking spirit to anybody who is willing to do business, no matter what that person's view is. This is hard, this is tough, but no matter what that person's view is, anybody who's willing to do business in the proper currency of intellectual discourse. There's a currency of intellectual discourse, just as there are currencies of economic discourse. It's pounds and pence in Britain, it's dollars and cents in the United States. In intellectual discourse, the currency consists of reasons, evidence, and arguments. So if Peter Singer, or Eugene Genovese, Robbie George of Cornell West, Nadine Strawson, is willing to do business in the proper currency of intellectual discourse, giving reasons, making arguments, citing evidence, not screaming at people or throwing things, doing real intellectual business, we should be willing to listen in a truth-seeking spirit. That's what civility really is. Now, education. What is education really fundamentally about? This I've learned from Brother Cornell. When we were teaching our seminars together at Princeton, he used to, what would the word be? Startle our students. He'd wake them up by beginning by telling them, if you are here in this classroom looking for a safe space, you've come to the wrong place. The Cornell West Robbie George classroom is not a safe space. It's very unsafe. Our whole job is to unsettle you. And everything is on the table. And your job is to unsettle us. We want you to attack our most fundamental beliefs. And we're going to attack, no matter what they are. You should hear a student spouting left-wing ideology, in a kind of rote manner, and hear Cornell cut loose on them. And I'll do the same to those on the conservative side. They're going to earn their right to free speech by giving reasons and arguments and evidence, no matter what it is. And then Cornell tells them, let me tell you what your purpose is at this university, what you've come here for. You think you've come here to get a credential that'll take you to Goldman Sachs? You may end up there, be great, yeah, I hope you do very well. Remember Princeton University when you do, but that's not why you're here. You know why you're here? You're here to learn how to die. Oh yeah, this is serious stuff. That's why we're reading Antigone, Plato's Gorgias, St. Augustine's Confessions, all the way up to Mill and John Henry Newman and C.S. Lewis and John Dewey and Leo Strauss and Martin Luther King letter from Birmingham jail, to learn how to die. Why are we trying to educate you to learn how to die? So that you will learn how to live. One of the greatest insights of the ancient Greeks, the great Greek thinkers, one of the greatest insights was you understand how to prioritize your values today. You may be 19 years old, but you learn about how to prioritize things today. You learn about what's important and what's not important by looking at things from the horizon, from the vantage point of your death. It's there in that perspective that you young men and women, 18, 19, 20 years old, will learn that there are some things that matter, yep, but not all that much. Wealth, power, prestige, influence, status, celebrity. Those are not bad things. You can do good things with them. The wonderful family that's sponsoring our conference is using its wealth to advance the cause of knowledge. Philanthropists all over the world do that. Some great people use their celebrity to advance good causes, do good work, help people who are in need. Same with status, same with prestige. So those things aren't bad things, but they're not good in themselves. They're not the things that ultimately matter. So what are the things that ultimately matter? Family, friendship, faith, knowledge, beauty, wisdom, integrity, honesty. In other words, the things that we intelligibly desire, not as means to other ends, but as ends in themselves, the things that aren't reducible to means to other things. And it's against that horizon of death, when we're not so much worried anymore about what it's going to say on our resume. Believe me, the students I teach at Princeton spend a lot of time thinking about what's the next item I can add to my resume. But you're not thinking about that anymore so much. You're thinking about what it says on the tombstone. The tombstone's not going to say $6 million a year income. You know, election to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It's going to say loving father, faithful husband, good friend. It's the tombstone virtues, not the CV virtues, that you're focused on in a serious, serious liberal arts education. And then finally, a word about the Civics Institutes. I think they're the most exciting thing happening in higher education. And I salute the leaders, some of whom I've mentioned, like Paul and Josh, who are here. They are doing the Lord's work, and it's so important to our country. It's so important to academia, but it's also so important to our country. Because it's true, as James Madison said, that only a well-instructed people can be permanently a free people. And ignorant people, certainly a stupid people, is not going to be able to maintain a republican order, civic order, what we today call democracy, what our founders favored the term republic. Now, why is that? How do we know that? Well, we know that republics throughout history, until the founding of the American Republic, had always failed. And when they'd failed, more often than not, they collapsed into the worst forms of tyranny. Democracy, we celebrate it, we rightly celebrate it, but it's really a thing we can only give 2 cheers to, not 3. After all, it was democracy that murdered Socrates. Right? Now, you want to avoid tyranny, including tyranny of the majority? You need to have constitutional structures like the beautiful ones we have in our Constitution, the separation of powers, federalism, our Bill of Rights, our various principles. But they're of no use if people don't know them, if people aren't committed to them, if people don't know how they work, if people don't know why they are there. Nino Scalia, when he gave talks like this, he used to carry it around in his pocket, he'd pull out a copy of the Soviet Constitution, and he'd start reading it. It would say, the people shall have freedom of speech. The people shall have freedom of religion. The people shall have right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Oh, they were all in there. It's a beautiful Constitution. Meaningless. Words on a page. What the founders would have called mere parchment guarantees. You need more than the words on the page. You need an informed citizenry who's jealous about those liberties, protecting them for themselves and others, living with the tough consequences you have to live with if you're going to maintain ordered liberty and Republican government. So our civic institutions need to do genuine, deep civic education. Now, final word on this. Among their goals, and this is legitimate and indeed needed, is enhancing viewpoint diversity at various universities around the country. Cornell and I have pointed to the problem in a recent op-ed we did together in The Hill of the paucity, the lack of viewpoint diversity at so many of our leading institutions, including, I regret to say, Princeton. So yes, the Civic Institute should help to redress that, bring more voices to the table, bring voices critical of dominant views on university campuses. But they must not degenerate into ideological centers. These should not be centers of conservative discourse. I'm conservative, you're hearing it from me. They should not be centers of conservative discourse. They should be centers of civic discourse, where students are confronted with the best that can be thought and said across the range of issues on all the competing sides of the issue. Yes, we need viewpoint diversity. One of the problems right now is that we lack it. That's why we're failing. It's among the reasons we're failing in the civic education area. But we don't want to create conservative playgrounds. You know, the liberals are over here in the sociology department or gender studies or whatever it is, and the conservatives are over here in the civic center. That's not the goal. The goal is genuine, deep civic education, what Cornell, echoing the Greeks, calls paideia. And that means that it's got to be a place where all voices are present. All voices are present, and there's genuine engagement across the lines of ideological division.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Absolutely. You know, one of the most distinguished historians, deeply conservative brother, his name is Neil Ferguson. He's at the Hoover Institute, Stanford. I don't spend a whole lot of time at the Hoover Institute, but I spend as much time as I can when there's high quality conversation taking place. And he's got a recent book on the American Empire, and he starts off saying there's been roughly 70 empires from the beginning of the species. The United States is number 68. And then he's echo of Hegel. Hegel's history is a slaughterhouse, it's a slaughter bench. Echoes of Edwin Gibbon's great work on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. History is nothing more than the register of human crimes and follies and misfortunes. And usually these empires began to decay with military overreach, corruption of elites across the board, impotence of citizens, and people more willing to scapegoat the most vulnerable than confront the most powerful, and leadership being more echoes of silos rather than finding their voices, like an Edmund Burke, deeply conservative but always willing to cut against the grain on India, cut against the grain on Ireland. What is the anthem of black people? Lift every voice, not echo. That's profoundly American, modern, and black. Because if you're just an echo, you're just a copy and a simulacra and a semblance. But if you are a voice, you are like your fingerprint, original, unique, distinctive, and no one in the world like you. No one has your voice. Can't be a jazz woman or a blues man if you haven't found your voice. If you're going to be an echo, stay in Mike's basement after dark. But if you find your voice, you're ready for the Apollo. And on your way to Denver, and maybe even Colorado Springs. I don't know what kind of nightclubs y'all have here or not, but I know you got some churches, so that's beautiful too. Because that's one of the laboratories. But all this has to do with being true to oneself, and the best inside of oneself is what has been poured into you by those who loved you. And to be in contact with that means to be in contact with what? The best of your own history, the best of American history. There is a great set of traditions in the United States, just as there's crimes here like any society, like any empire. The best and the worst. Same is true inside of us. And what does that mean? It means then, when Brother Robbie and I tell our students, you come here to learn how to die in order to learn how to live. Anytime you seriously question yourself and you let go of a certain assumption, that's a form of death. And there's no life and there's no rebirth without death. One of the greatest eulogies ever given for Martin Luther King Jr. was given by a vanilla Catholic sister named Dorothy Day. She was a giant. The Catholic Worker, April 5th, 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily. And she was echoing a Jewish brother named Paul, who wrote letters to Christian churches that said Christians must learn how to die daily, because there's no rebirth without death. And that's because of the centrality of love. And of course, there's no accident that when you look at the history of this nation, in terms of the kind of moral awakenings and spiritual awakenings, it often comes as much from our artists and musicians as it does our academicians and intellectuals. And the reason is because to learn how to die in order to learn how to live, and he or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery. So there's an intimate connection between freedom and love and freedom. That love is one of the most difficult, delicate, powerful, alluring, absurd, but indispensable modes of being in the world. And anybody who's actually fell in love knows that something died in you when you fell in love. Some of your narcissism died. Some of your selfishness died, and you emerged with a smile, entangled with another self. Now, it might be like Sappho, it might get bittersweet real quick, we don't know. I know we got somebody here that's been married 25 years. Where are you? Yeah, 25 years and smiling and loving. Oh, yes, indeed. 39 years. Let me see you smile, brother. Yeah, there it is, there it is. Well, you know what I'm talking about. So that this is the question of what it means to learn how to love. And love, as Kierkegaard points out in his great classic of Works in Love, is one in many. You can love wisdom like Socrates, but not necessarily love your neighbor like Leviticus. You can love beauty like John Keats, and not necessarily love the holy like John Keats. He's a secular brother, isn't he? Chekhov, deeply convinced of the accuracy of Christian analysis of humanity, but can't accept the Christian faith. He says it's too beautiful to be true. And he goes every Sunday to church and he says it's too beautiful to be true. I'm a Darwinian, I'm a medical doctor. I love the compassion and the concern with the orphan and the widow and the fatherless and the motherless, but I can't believe that stuff about a Palestinian Jew named Jesus getting up from the dead. No, I'm a scientist too. Okay, Anton, go on and finish your plays. Thank you for the short stories. But some of us hold on even for resurrection. That's another issue. But it's how we learn how to listen to each other and allow forms of love to be enacted in us. And there is no love without courage. Just as courage without love hugs its knees in hell. I don't know who said that, but it sure sounds good. And I think it's true, because you can be a courageous gangster. You can be a courageous hater. But courage with love takes you to a different level. And that's very much what we're about in the teaching that we do. And of course, in the end, the students would always rather see sermons than hear them. So it's in our example, in many ways, that we have the most impact, even given our readings of John Stuart Mill and Matthew Arnold and Martin King and Rabbi Heschel and Zaid and the others, by example. And I think one of the ways in which we can try to come out of this grimness and this bleakness in this present moment is fortifying ourselves and by example, simply saying, I choose integrity, I choose honesty, I choose decency. Drop the mic. That's just the way we roll. Not too popular, so what? For Christians, your life ought to be cruciform anyway. You're on the way to the cross. And if not, check yourself. Pontius Pilate is smiling. Come my way. No, I choose honesty, decency, and integrity. Not to be rewarded, not to pat yourself on the back or that virtue signaling that you see so often. People want to be viewed as part of the do-gooder crowd. Let that go. It's about you being honest and candid with yourself, just like a jazz musician. Honest, improvisational, flexible, fluid, learning how to receive as well as give, and situating yourself in a great tradition of those who came before, not in the spirit of imitation, but creation, and knowing that you're still a cracked vessel. That's really a beautiful thing. That's what the joy is all about. And so oftentimes with our students, it's a sad thing to see what they have to deal with in the culture these days. So much of their culture is a joyless quest for insatiable pleasures. They can get any kind of pleasure they want, but still the hearts are so empty and vacuous, because joy is the fruit of deep love. And if you're not connected to that kind of love, you miss out on your joy. And it's not just them. We can look at Hamlet himself, the greatest literary character in the history of all of modern Europe. Incomparable, inimitable Shakespeare himself. What is it about Hamlet? No joy. No cultivated capacity to love. Ask Ophelia about that. And yet, so sophisticated, brilliant, unbelievable. Shakespeare knew what he was doing and saying. And that's why Hamlet endures, because he's saying something profound about what it means to be human. And that's true for all of the great towering figures that we get a chance to read. And it's not just in the West, it's in other places as well. But the legacies of Athens and Jerusalem are magnificent places to begin. And it will lead you to wrestle with various questions about what it means to be human, connected to possibilities of genuine individuality and genuine democracy, small d. Very, very small d, because I know the Democratic Party sometimes think that they have a connection just because they got the same word. No. Any party subject to corruption, dishonesty, hypocrisy, just like any human being, any group, no matter what color, any formation. And the question becomes, do we have what it takes? And that's always an open question. So I'm not a cheap optimist. See, I'm a Christian. Christians have nothing to do with optimism at all. Hope, that's different. Hope is not the same as optimism. And hope is about being a hope. It's not talking about hope. Because hope is a virtue as well as a verb. It's in motion, just like love. It's a virtue and a verb. It's in motion. And we don't know. When T.S. Eliot says ours is in the trying, the rest is not our business. That comes out of the four quartets. He's absolutely right. All we can do, bear witness, try, be part of a cloud of witnesses, pass it on to the next generation, and in part, passing it on to the next generation here at this august institution, in part is what this grand effort is all about.
A few years ago, Cornell and I were invited by the administration at Princeton to be the keynote speakers. We were in a situation like this for Freshman Families Weekend. This is in October. The freshmen had just arrived in September, and they're invited to bring their parents, have their parents come in October for a whole weekend of activities, talks, and so forth. So the administration asked us if we would do a presentation, and they even gave us the title, The Purposes of a Liberal Arts Education, right? So we accepted. And there they were. We were in the biggest auditorium at Princeton. The freshmen were there with their parents. We were introduced, President Eisgruber introduced Dean Dolan, and Dean Dolan introduced us. It was all very formal. So we did what we thought we were assigned to do, which is talk about the purposes of a liberal arts education. So I tried to make the point that we need to be careful not to reduce the purposes of liberal arts education to professionalism, professional achievement. That, it's important that students be educated well. It's important to them getting a job, to having a good income, to, having high social status. And I made the point, as I've made it to you, that these things are not bad. They're certainly not bad in themselves, and it's not bad to aspire to be partner at Goldman Sachs or Cravath, Swaine & Moore, or have a big successful startup. Those things are all good, but those aren't the fundamental purposes. Getting you there isn't the fundamental purpose. And then I made my pitch, and I said, students have to understand, and parents have to understand that, our real goal here is to really explore what it means to be human. That's really what a liberal arts education is about. And that means challenging conventional beliefs and challenging your own beliefs and accepting challenges of your own beliefs. And our job as professors, our vocation as teachers and scholars is to challenge you and to challenge ourselves. We're going to be challenging your kids. And you freshmen, you need to be open to those challenges. And you need to be willing to be open-minded and think deeply and raise questions. And I could tell I just wasn't connecting. I was not making the sale. So I kind of then just sort of gave up and said, well, Cornell, what do you have to say about this? And he just looks out at the audience, those fresh-faced young people and their parents, And he said, the purpose of a liberal education, the reason you are here is to learn how to die. Remember that? I saw every dad turn to every mom and say, $70,000. But it really is, it really is what it's all about. And this leads me, I'll go into something controversial here. I happen to think that a liberal arts education actually is for everybody. It's very fashionable these days, I know, especially among my fellow conservatives, but not just them, to say, we send too many kids to college. We should be sending more kids into the trades, and what good is a philosophy major? And you've heard politicians say these things, and they're at state universities, they're cutting programs in the humanities and all this. Look, all of us are human beings, and it is an aspect of our flourishing, our well-being, to wrestle with the question, what does it mean to be a human? That doesn't mean everybody has to be a philosophy major. And it doesn't mean that everybody's got to go on for a PhD in religion or theology or philosophy or some related political theory or social theory or things like that. Nor does it mean that the university can't be teaching math and physics and chemistry and biology and all these things. And it doesn't mean that that it's not important to have what Franklin called useful knowledge, knowledge that does have practical implications. But even if kids don't go to high school, in my opinion, if kids don't go to college, even those who don't go to college should at least in the later years of high school have opportunities to read some stuff and to talk about some stuff that will get them into the great existential questions. I think the overwhelming majority of young people are capable of that, and I'm certain that if they're capable of it, they could benefit from it. So I'd like to encourage more broadly, going beyond colleges and universities, even high schools, to get more focused on what Cornell calls paideia, on education that's not about just the acquisition of information and skills, as important as those things are. It is good for our students to know that at Appomattox Courthouse, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, not to Dwight D. Eisenhower, and a lot of our students actually don't know things like that. So yes, that information is important. Having skills, intellectual skills, that's important too, but the vast majority of our young people are capable and definitely would benefit from, at some point, doing some serious wrestling with the great questions of meaning and value, the questions, as I said before, human nature, the human good, human rights, human dignity, human destiny. And not only is that good in itself, not only is that an aspect of their own flourishing, that's how you fashion a Republican citizen. Republican citizen, I'm small r Republican. The Republican citizen is not a subject, right? If you're in a monarchy situation, you're the subject of the king. Might be a good king, maybe a bad king. Maybe a good czar, maybe a bad czar. But you're a subject. You're not a citizen in the sense in which you're a citizen of a republic. You're participating in civic life. You're participating in decision-making for the community. You have an active role. Well, I don't see how you can do that, since so many questions ultimately do implicate deep matters, unless you've reflected on those deep matters. So I don't think we should be depriving our young people of those opportunities.
No, I agree, but the good news is that so many of the towering figures never went to college. You see, Melville didn't go, Mark Twain didn't go, Virginia Woolf didn't go, William Faulkner didn't go, James Baldwin didn't go to college, but college went through him. B.B. King or Hank Williams didn't go to college. But Mozart and Beethoven didn't go to college either. Brahms didn't need to go to college. Just come down from Hamburg and hang out in Vienna. Our challenge is, because of our precious citizens of all colors in this particular democratic experiment, what is it? 55% of our fellow citizens never set foot in a college. but they can still be grand exemplars of integrity, honesty, decency, intellectual sophistication, and subtlety. But the question becomes, what centers are available for those who don't go to college so that they can still experience deep paideia, that formation of attention and cultivation of critical skills, and the maturation of courageous personalities? When the centers themselves shrivel up, and then the universities are flattening out and becoming just professionalist and technocratic and managerial and not wanting to be Socratic and deeply questioning, then we've got a much, much deeper question. Because I've taught in prison for 47 years, and a lot of those brothers, they read Beckett, we read Chekhov, they don't need to go to Princeton. They're probably better off not at Princeton. Some of them too deep for Princeton. I mean, Mark Twain at Harvard, let's just be honest, that's not going to work. No, that's not going to work. Not at all. But on the other hand, the university can become one of those grand centers for Socratic energy, for serious reflection, contestation, disagreement. But in the end, and we had this question last week, how do we create bonds of trust with one another so that we're free enough to really raise our voices and not censor ourselves and say what's fashionable rather than what is authentic. And once bonds of trust are shattered, which is very much what we're wrestling with today, then we need even more courageous, not self-righteous, but courageous examples that say, I'm a truth pursuer, and I'm headed in this direction. That's why he's spending so much time with Brother Robbie. I thought he was conservative. He is a loving, decent brother who's not just wrong on particular issues, but helps me become better when I'm wrong and when I'm right, and I can revel in his humanity, which is always deeper than just being politically right or wrong. And all of us, I hope, experience that on Thanksgiving dinners. You sit around the table and you look at mama and daddy and grandmama and granddaddy and aunts and uncles and cousins, and I'm sure there's not wholesale political and ideological agreement around that table, whether it's a turkey or a ham sitting at the center of the table. But you revel in their humanity and you love them to death. Grandmama, I'd take a bullet for you even if you think the earth is flat. I don't care. Let Copernicus go. I'm with you, Grandma. Not grandmother, I believe that, but my grandmother went to second grade, so she's not obsessed with Ptolemy and Copernicus, you know what I mean? But it's that sense of human connection. And how do we use that kind of thing to make it much broader so we have circles of care and circles of concern, given, the dimness and the grimness that's out there in terms of the...
Cornell mentioned the self-censorship problem, and it turns out that I was initially skeptical, actually, because I've never had a problem in my classes. I teach large classes, as Cornell knows. I've never had a problem with students expressing a very wide range of views, challenging things they know that I don't preach my own views in class. I present all the different arguments, but I'm public enough that my students all know what I think about things. And boy, I'm not hearing a lot of agreement with me. I mean, my students always were willing to challenge ideas they associated with me, and the spectrum is there represented. So I was initially skeptical when I heard, well, there's a self-censorship problem in colleges and universities. Well, then I began to see the actual data. Our campus newspaper, the Daily Princetonian, did a poll. The poll showed exactly what the poll done by the Crimson, the Harvard newspaper, showed about Harvard undergraduates. A massive percentage, across the political spectrum, by the way, not just the conservatives, were not saying things that they believed, or sometimes saying things they didn't believe, which, my mother told me that was lying, because they were afraid of the consequences. Not, by the way, for the most part, not the consequences of the professor doing something to them, like giving them a bad grade. There again, that was my initial thought when I saw the data. Are kids really that afraid of us? They think we're that mean and dishonest that we would not grade them fairly. Well, no, there's a certain amount of fear of that. Some of it, alas, justified, which is terrible. But much greater is the fear of social ostracism. And here, the digital age is not helping us. Kids know that Twitter is forever. You call somebody a racist or another bad name on Twitter, it doesn't go away. So kids rather, because they're so focused on their futures and so desirous of being accepted and not being kicked out of their friendship circles and organizations they belong to, they won't express a view that they fear might be unpopular or might generate a bad comment on social media. Now, we cannot educate, at least in the subjects that Cornell and I teach, we cannot educate our students if that's their attitude. It can't be done. We need to open them up. We need to persuade them that it's worth it. We can't guarantee that they won't suffer bad consequences. I wish we could. I wish we could say, we'll give you a vaccine that'll prevent somebody doing bad to you or something, saying somebody bad to you or calling you a name or defaming you. We can't do that. We can't offer that. What we can say, what we should say, because it's true, is it's worth it. The slings and arrows that come from being a person of integrity, a person who means what he says and says what he means, it's worth it. You might give stuff up, you have to make sacrifices, but it's worth it. We bet our lives on this. But Cornell and I have both been kicked out of groups for all intents and purposes because we dissented, or we had been kicked out of groups in which we were celebrated. We were considered big shots. You know, we're proud to be associated with it. Then we express a little dissent, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, you guys are not playing for the team here, and you're out of here. Guess what? It was worth it. Wouldn't change a thing. We have to persuade our students. Now, the really bad thing is it turns out it's not just the students. It's young faculty. And sometimes not just young faculty. There are full professors and endowed chairs who don't want to alienate themselves, for example, with their graduate students. We had a vote on a relatively controversial issue in a faculty meeting. I'm telling tales out of school here, but we had a faculty meeting, a relatively controversial issue. It had an indirect effect on politics. And there were professors, more than one, who told me, I hope, I for 37 years was Princeton faculty parliamentarian, I hope this can be a secret ballot, which is fine. Why? I'm worried that my graduate students would see how I'm voting. Afraid of the students. They should be the ones modeling civic courage. Cornell was right when he said, our young people don't have enough role models. We all do, but certainly young people learn more from example than from precept. Now, that doesn't mean precept's not important. You got to talk. You have to say things. You have to do a little preaching. But that's the less valuable of the two halves of the equation. The other half, example, is even more powerful. It's even more compelling. So if you want your young people to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers, and we should all want that. Otherwise, what are we doing in this business? What are we doing in academia? If we want them to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers, we've got to model that. Can't just preach it. We have to practice what we preach.
I'll just make one last point in defense of the dead. You know, Chesterton makes this point about one of the problems of modern society is that we have a oligarchy of the quick, and we don't have a close enough relation with the dead. Because let us be honest, most of the greatest figures of the species are dead. Now, I don't want to downplay you all's great potential and so forth, but most of the great figures of the species are long dead. So I tell my students when they say, well, Brother Wells, I don't see people around. Have you read about Socrates? Did you read about Audre Lorde? Did you read about Diderot? Do you know who Fannie Lou Hamer was? Have an intimate relation with the dead. Put their books next to your bed. And we haven't even got the Hebrew scripture in New Testament, but I don't want to get evangelical here as a Christian. But I have nothing against it. You see, The examples at the deepest level, not of purity, not of pristine status, but mustering the courage, are those who in the past have exemplified certain kinds of ways of being. The St. Francis of Assisi's, the Baal Shem Tofs, overflowing with love and joy every minute of his life. Where does that come from? Read about it. Get a sense of what the context is for these figures. And to the degree to which the dead become more vital and vibrant in the lives of the living is another sign that we have a possibility of the kind of moral and spiritual awakening that is required for any kind of political breakthrough, no matter what kinds of politics we have. And so that's one of the things that we struggle with in our class, just to make sure that people have an I-thou relation, to use Martin Buber's language, an I-thou relation with the dead. Is that rain? As soon as I start talking, it starts raining like that. Oh, I apologize. I'm sorry about that. But it rains, it shifts like that in Colorado, huh? Oh, a mile up in the sky, huh? Wow. It really sounds good, though, I must say. It sounds good.
Well, thank you all very much. It's really been a pleasure being with you this morning. Thank you.